Welcome to a special conversation hosted by India Foundation on the topic Technologies to Hasten the India Growth Story. In this conversation, we will try to understand the impact of key emerging technologies on Indian economy and society, and we will also try to understand what do we need to do as a nation to become a leader in these critical technologies. To discuss these important issues, we could not have had a better person than one of India's leading thought leaders in the field of technology, Dr. M. Jagadesh Kumar. Dr. M. Jagadesh Kumar is presently serving as the Vice Chancellor of JNU. He has previously served as the Professor of Electrical Engineering in IIT Delhi, where he held the NXP Chair Professorship instituted by Philips Semiconductors. Dr. Kumar is one of those rare academics who's both a brilliant researcher and a great professor. He has won several awards for his teaching, including the 2013 Award for Excellence in Teaching at IIT Delhi and the 2008 IBM Faculty Award. His field of research is nanotechnology, where he is one of India's top scholars and has published 3 books, 4 book chapters, and over 250 publications. He did his PhD from IIT Madras Electrical Engineering Department and did his postdoctoral research at the University of Waterloo, Canada. His achievements in these fields have been well recognized by his peer group, and he presently serves as the editor-in-chief of the IETE Technological Review. He is a fellow of the Indian National Academy of Engineering and National Academy of Sciences, India. He has also won the 29th Ramlal Wadhwa Gold Medal for distinguished contribution to the field of semiconductor technology. As an educationist and a public intellectual, apart from his duties as the Vice Chancellor of JNU, Dr. Kumar is also the chairperson of the governing body of National Council of Science Museums, instituted by the Ministry of Culture, Government of India. He previously served as a member of the UGC and the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. Dr. Kumar, it's an honor to host you for this conversation. Dr. Kumar, before we talk about the impact of specific technologies on our country, I want you to take a bird's eye view and talk a little bit about the historical moment that we are living through. There is a view amongst policymakers, academics, and business leaders that we are living through what they call a fourth industrial revolution, which is the result of a fusion of several technologies that are blurring the lines between our physical, digital, and biological world. Do you agree with this assessment?
If you look at the evolution of technologies right from the Industrial Revolution 1, where we began with using steam to electricity, and then the electronics and communication engineering, there is a distinct separation between these revolutions, industrial revolutions. But today when we are talking about Industrial Revolution 4, it is of course based on the foundation which starts from the electricity and electronics and communication engineering. Sometimes people think that Industry 4.0 is just an extension of Industry 3.0. But now we see emerging distinct features of Industry 4.0 because the way we moved from Industry 1.0 to the next levels, the time frame was too long. But the shift from Industry 3.0 to 4.0 happened very quickly, and the kind of developments that are taking place today in Industry 4.0, they are too rapid. They are so rapid that human societies may actually find it difficult to absorb those technologies. And this is another reason why we need to focus not just only on the specific technologies, but also its impact on human life, how we interact with each other and how we interact with the environment around us. Right. So therefore more awareness needs to be created in the users of this technology. While scientists will work in a formal way and they come up with formal innovations, as consumers of the technology, if we are not well prepared, there is going to be a mismatch. And that's why there is a lot of discussion on the impact of Industry 4.0 on the human societies.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. That's a great starting point for our conversation. I want you to now talk specifically about the impact of these technologies in India. What is your assessment of the disruption that these emerging technologies will bring upon Indian economy and society, given that we are a developing country that is trying to, showcase its leadership in the field of technology?
Right. We need to look at the challenges that our country is facing today. Right. One, of course, is security. Today we talk about not only the physical security at our borders, but also the cyber security. So the physical cyber systems need to be secured properly. So that is one of our biggest challenge today. And then the health. We have seen during COVID pandemic how important to take care of our health system in the country. So can we develop technologies which will make the health systems more affordable and more accessible to our population across the country? So that's another challenge that we have. And agriculture. Water is used very heavily. Nearly 70% of our clean water is used simply for agriculture. And while India has nearly 20% of world's population, we have only 4% of water resources in our country. And out of that, 70% is used only for agriculture. So can we innovate so that we can produce high yield varieties of food grains, but using lesser water? So that's another challenge, so that the farmers will gain from these kind of developments. So this is another one. The other important area is the pedagogy, the education, the educational system in our country. India is one of the largest educational system in the world. We have close to 300 million students right from class 1 to the university level. Now the challenge for us is, although we have 1040 universities, about 42,000 colleges, and another about 11,000 institutions of learning, the problem is how to reach out to these 300 million students and meet their aspirations. If we build our universities and educational institutes at whatever rate that is physically possible for us, perhaps it may take another 100 years to meet everybody's aspiration. That is why we need to look at alternate ways of reaching out to people, make our education more holistic and more flexible, and this is where digital platforms will come very, very handy. We of course have to have good internet connection across the country, and which is happening with the fiber optic network spread across the country. So pedagogy or education is another challenge for us, and we now have the national education policy which talks about various digital technologies to be integrated, the teachers to be trained on these digital platforms, so that education becomes affordable and accessible to everybody. And the last area on which India has to focus is environment. Today we are talking about climate change and so many other challenges. So security, health, agriculture, pedagogy, and environment. If you take the first letters of these words, shape. So if you want to shape the future of our country, these are the 5 areas where we need to do really innovative research.
That's brilliant, Dr. Kumar. I think you've very comprehensively articulated the challenges for us as a country. I want to now ask you about how well equipped we are to deal with these challenges. I'm reminded of a 2015 quote by Mr. Narayan Murthy, which got a lot of press. He gave this quote at a convocation ceremony of IISc Bangalore. And he said, and let me quote him, said that there has not been a single invention from India in the last 60 years that has become a household name globally, nor any idea that led to earth-shaking invention to delight global citizens. Our youngsters have not done much impactful research work, despite being equal to their counterparts in intellect and energy in Western universities. Dr. Kumar, how do you assess the contribution of Indian universities to the field of science and technology since independence?
The word earth-shaking is very interesting. I would rather prefer life-transforming technologies than some imaginary earth-shaking inventions. If you look at during last 50 years in our country, there have been several life-transforming technologies which were developed in our country. The simplest example is the milk cooperation movement that was started in Gujarat. Right, all along we were thinking that only cow milk is suitable for producing milk powder. But it was there, Dr. Kurian and their team, they developed the technology for using the buffalo milk to produce milk powder. That's a life transforming technology, and it's helping so many farmers who raise these cattle, and then it has changed their lives. And similarly, there are several other examples where we have developed highly efficient and pest resistant seeds to help our farmers, and that is the reason why we have the green revolution. So there have been several formal and also informal innovations that have been taking place in our country. I don't see that our country is lagging behind in terms of entrepreneurship. Today our country is rated as one of the third largest countries with the entrepreneurial ecosystem, and there has been so much of interest in becoming entrepreneurs instead of taking up a job and then live for themselves, right? So there are very transforming changes that have been taking place in our country. I think I see that there is a great future in terms of developing new technologies and becoming a leader in the world. But I also would like to tell you that the days of a scientist sitting in a lab alone looking through the microscope and then coming up with a kind of eureka kind of invention, those days are over. Today, if scientists have to come up with innovative ideas, they should be able to work in teams, they should be able to work with unlike minds. That is the only way we can come up with innovations. And in India, several measures are taken to encourage this kind of multidisciplinary research. In several universities, for example, in JNU itself, we have taken several steps. One example I would like to give you, how multidisciplinary research can actually help the students and the faculty members to do outstanding research. Couple of years ago, we began thinking about, can we look at the Ayurveda, the traditional medical system that we have, from a modern perspective. So we started a 5-year BSc, MSc Ayurveda biology program in the university, where professors from molecular medicine, life sciences, they will sit across the table with professors from School of Sanskrit and Indic Studies. And you can imagine when these unlike minds sit there, how creative it would be, how innovative it would be. So this is how universities like JNU should encourage multidisciplinary research across the domains.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. So is it safe to say that you respectfully disagree with Professor Narayan Murthy, with Dr. Narayan Murthy on his comments?
You see, people can have different opinions. All that I am saying is, I would like to see more life transforming technologies being developed in our country, which will positively impact the lives of the people down to the last person in the village. And in India, many such things are happening, and we need to be optimistic and hopeful rather than being pessimistic.
Fair enough. That's a fair assessment, Dr. Kumar. Let me now talk to you about some specific technologies that are that are on the verge of disrupting societies and economies around the world. And let me start with your own subject area, which is nanotechnology. Scholars typically, when they look at the life cycle of technologies, they use a 4-phase framework, where each technology goes through an R&D phase, and then an ascent phase, and then a maturity phase, and then eventually declines and becomes obsolete. Where do you place developments in nanotechnology in this framework, and which application of nanotechnology do you think has the greatest potential to change our world in the coming years?
You're absolutely right. Any new technology that is being developed has these 4 cycles. In the case of nanotechnology, actually there was too much of hype. But fortunately, over a period of time, the technology matured, and now we know there are certain segments which can be developed at a rapid pace using nanotechnology. One, of course, all of us are familiar, the semiconductor technology, which has advanced so fast that today we have so many mobile electronic systems which are affordable and which has revolutionized the communication technologies. affecting the lifestyle of everybody in our country. But there are other areas where nanotechnology can be a very, very futuristic opportunity for us. One is the quantum computing. Quantum computing is going to be a real necessity for us in future, especially with the collection and the storage of data that we are experiencing today. To process this data, you need extremely fast computers, and only quantum computing can do that. Now, in quantum computing, there are several things that one need to do. One is, of course, using nanotechnology, developing these qubits. And then the next challenge for us is, how do you connect these qubits using interconnects? Today we know in semiconductor technology we have already faced a red brick wall in terms of the speed of the processors, primarily because of the interconnect delays. So tomorrow if you want to develop extremely efficient quantum computers, so how are you going to connect these qubits? That's going to be another technological challenge. And the third most important thing is developing efficient algorithms, because there will be qubit errors that will be generated when the data is transferred across the qubits. So you need efficient algorithms. So you see that developing quantum computing using nanotechnology, it is a multidisciplinary approach. You require electrical engineers, you require material scientists, you require physicists, you require computer scientists. So I see that there is a great opportunity, and in the last budget, I think 8,000 crores was allotted for developing quantum computing in our country. And the other area where nanotechnology will play a very disruptive role is in pharmaceutical industry. Developing vaccines, developing drugs, understanding the molecular structure of drugs, all this can be done using nanotechnology. So, and then agriculture. Agriculture is another area I think nanotechnology will bring a revolution in terms of developing plants which are pest resistant, which can grow without really getting affected in water, where water is not available very easily. So there are many things that can happen with nanotechnology. Within IIT system and in top universities such as JNU, a lot of work is being done, especially in biosensors. The sensors which can be implanted in the human body to collect the data. A lot of work is being done in our institutes. So, and also there is a investment, huge investment that is being done by the government in developing these nanotechnological applications.
So you're optimistic about India developing its capabilities in these two critical technologies?
Definitely. And we have very good programs also in the IITs and other universities to train the students in nanotechnology. So hundreds of students are being already trained. So the manpower development is happening in parallel to the technological development that is happening in our labs.
Fair enough. You've spoken about quantum computing and nanotechnology, both of which operate in the world of the very small. In this world of the very small, another technology that is generating a lot of hype is a new gene editing technology called CRISPR, whose pioneers got the Nobel Prize for Chemistry last year. The technology, in fact, got a lot of attention from mainstream media in 2018, when a Chinese scientist, Jiankui Hui, used this CRISPR technology to create 2 gene-edited babies who were resistant to HIV. How do you assess the risks and rewards of the widespread use of gene editing?
Right. So, in simple words, in gene editing, what we do is we identify a targeted part of DNA, and we remove that from the DNA and fill up that with other material there. So that is what is gene editing. And I know that in 2018, when this Chinese team, their work led to the birth of 2 girls, there was an outcry across the world. And the scientists, of course, they said that they did this experiment to make them immune to HIV virus. But the outcry came not against the technology, but how this technology will be used in future. Because any technology has 2 sides. You can use it, you can misuse it. Take for example nuclear technology. You can use it in either way. So therefore, I feel that research should be encouraged in all areas of research pursuits, but we need to also look at the research developments when we use them in our real life from an ethical point of view. So this ethics and scientific research should go together, but unfortunately I think in our educational system focus on ethical frameworks, what ethical frameworks we should follow in our life is something that I think we need to put more focus on. And if we develop proper ethical standards on how we use the outcome of research, I feel that in all areas we should promote our efforts to do innovative research.
Fair enough. Which leads me, Dr. Kumar, to a slightly philosophical question, because you mentioned that scientists, when they're doing experiments, the ethical considerations are sometimes not at the top of their mind. There is this American biologist, Mr. Edward Wilson, who famously said that the real problem of humanity is that we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. When you look at the terrific potential of some of these emerging technologies like gene editing, which you just mentioned, experiments with viruses in government labs, creation of sentient artificial intelligence, development of unmanned aerial and terrestrial vehicles, is there a case to be made for drawing red lines on scientific research by governments? Are there certain kinds of experiments that governments should not allow scientists to work on, or are these expectations of imposing moral limits on technology futile?
A very interesting question. You see, our human mind, it always is in search of free thinking. It always likes freedom. It doesn't like curbs. And that is how the human societies have evolved. But whenever we tried, and it happened in earlier centuries, the scientists, when they were doing certain kind of research, the societies which were there, or the powers that were there, they did not like, and the scientists were persecuted. But in my view, I think all areas of scientific research should be encouraged. Doing research is exploring our free mind. There should not be any curb on that. But regulation is required when we want to use the product of this scientific research, this technological innovation, where and how we are going to use those products. And that is where I think we need a clear ethical framework to decide on that. I will give you one simple example. When 30 years ago, 40 years ago, scientists, they invented the cochlear implant for deaf persons. They thought they invented a great device. But they, when approached the deaf people said, why do we need this cochlear implant? We are so happy in our own world. So now you can see the disconnect, right? So similarly, when we develop the technologies, we should avoid that disconnect. What I am trying to say is that when we do research, the stakeholders also need to be involved in this. Currently what happens is the scientists sit in their labs, they develop some great technologies, and then they think that it is great for the society, it is very useful for the society, without really taking their feedback. So we have this hierarchical system, and we need to break those hierarchical system and democratize this entire process by involving the stakeholders. Then what will happen is this possibility of misusing the technologies will get minimized. In my view, I think any government regulation which will affect the basic research itself may not be a good idea, but there should be regulations on how this technology will be used for the human welfare.
Given that you are describing the scientific process these days, where there are multidisciplinary teams sometimes working across geographies, working on a particular research area, is there a case to be made that it is even futile to expect that governments can regulate scientific developments and experiments?
I take it at the fundamental level, the human nature is to explore. The human nature doesn't like to be bounded. So therefore, any measures that we take, if it goes against the human nature, I don't think we will be able to build any happy, harmonious human societies.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. Talking about the role of governments in developing technological capabilities, two of India's big success stories in this field are India's space program and our nuclear program, both of which were led by our government institutions. What are the lessons that we can learn from the success of these two programs to develop our technological capabilities in other critical areas?
Right. One clear lesson is that you can start from ground zero but become world leaders, right? In space technology, we have proved that. The other lesson that we had to learn from this experiment is not to simply duplicate those experiments. Just because they are government organizations and they are doing very well, can we have similar government organizations which will become successful? Because today the situation has changed, the ecosystem has changed. Take space technology itself, in which we are so successful. What are the components of the successful space technology? You know, you require good propellers, very efficient propellers. You require small weight, high efficiency fuels. You require materials which can be used to make heat resistant shields for the rockets or for the vehicles which are re-entering into our atmosphere. So there are several such things that are required, and this is the greatest opportunity for us to involve other industries who can actually work on these. So therefore, you see now, therefore, it is not just only the government organization, but you are encouraging several other industries, the peripheral industries, but central to the operation of the space program, also to develop their technologies. And that is what we need to do today, instead of just repeating only the space program kind of experiments in our country.
So government acting more like a catalyst to build an ecosystem.
Right, right. We need to develop the ecosystem, not similar kind of organizations. If you develop the ecosystem, several such industries will sprout and then they will become big trees, strengthening our industrial ecosystem.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. I want to change tracks and talk a little bit about two other technologies which are getting a lot of mainstream attention from the media these days. You spoke about the initial hype associated with nanotechnology. Gartner is a firm which comes out with this annual hype cycle for emerging technologies to discern hype from what's commercially viable as far as the technology is concerned. Can you please share your views on the expectations that we should have from blockchain, which is a technology that is getting a lot of attention from media these days? Do you think that it will fulfill the potential that people are talking about as far as its use in transforming our lives are concerned?
You see, when new technologies are developed, because our minds are conditioned to the existing technologies, some technologies may create some kind of fear in our minds that it may disrupt our existing systems. So we have only two options. One option is to keep away from the technology out of fear. The other way is to master the technology so that it can be effectively used. So therefore, blockchain is something that we cannot keep away, and especially when we have a globally interconnected world, we cannot remain as an isolated entity without getting affected. So therefore, my feeling is that we need to get into the blockchain technology and see how effectively we can use and integrate ourselves with the rest of the world. We can no longer remain as an isolated entity. Blockchain is just an example. Who knows in future what new technologies will sprout?
Are on the horizon.
Yes, yes.
I mean, we look at the developments in the field of unmanned aerial and terrestrial vehicles. Again, the technology which is going to change the landscape of countries around the world. When you look at self-driving cars, when you look at drones, do you have similar views that this is a fact of life? It's only a question of countries and societies reconciling to this brave new world?
I think countries are welcoming some of these new technologies, because they can have a very positive impact on our lives, and also on several things. For example, you want to deliver vaccine to some remote place, you can use these unmanned vehicles, and or you want to secure your border, you want to monitor the movement of any enemy troops at the border. Ultimately, we had to develop our own technologies. Becoming dependent on other countries is going to be a very, very expensive exercise for us. Yes, there could be some time lag in terms of developing the technologies. We miss the semiconductor technology bus. But today, semiconductor technology has become so centralized. In fact, more than 60% of the chips are produced only from some of the Asian countries, 4 or 5 Asian countries. So they have become highly centralized, and penetrating that may become a challenging task. But then we need to look at other areas. Today we are talking about electronic waste. Right? Where do you dump all these mobile phones and microprocessors, because you use inorganic semiconductors there, you use a lot of plastic and the metals in these chips. So people are now looking at, can we use organic semiconductors which are biodegradable to make our electronic systems? So we need to look around for such futuristic technologies and start early, so that we will become leaders in those technologies in the world.
Fair enough. Dr. Kumar, when you were outlining the challenges for India in the field of technology under the SHAPE framework that you gave us, one of the pillars of that framework was the question of using technology for environmental issues. I want to have a longer conversation with you about that issue. Just last week, the IPCC came out with a 4,000-page report on anthropogenic climate change, and it made dire predictions about our medium to long-term future as a species, unless an immediate course correction was brought about. What role can technology play in mitigating global warming, and what is India's role in developing these technologies for a more sustainable way of life?
Very important question, because there was a report just yesterday that in another 20 years or so, the sea levels will rise and affecting a huge number of populations living near the coastal areas. And several such things may happen because of the climate change. One of the reasons, there are of course several reasons why climate change is happening. Some of those reasons are related to how we are leading our own lives. Today we have come to believe that more consumption means more development, and we need to move away from that kind of attitude, and we need to preserve our resources and use it as little as possible through reuse, recycle kind of means. And we also need to think about our future generations. When we go away from this planet Earth, what is that we are leaving behind for our future generations? So this thought has to be there in our mind constantly. So this is where some technologies can play a significant role. For example, the fuel consumption, it's increasing exponentially, right? We are using all these fossil based fuels that we are using, which will get exhausted very soon. But even before they get exhausted, they may damage our environment so much that it may become irreversible. So that's why we are now in India looking at alternate ways of generating this energy. Today our focus is on renewable energy resources such as the solar power, wind power. We are already producing close to about 26% of our total capacity for generating power, which is about 350 gigawatts. About 26% of that we are already producing using renewable energy resources. Perhaps if we continue on the same path, India may actually become a role model for the rest of the world on how to minimize the energy consumption and how to generate this energy using environmentally friendly means. So there are several such technologies that we need to develop in order to control the climate change.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar.
There is one more emphasis that we are giving in our country, that is the use of electric vehicles. So in next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, perhaps you will see more electric vehicles moving on our roads, cutting down all the smoke that comes out out of these vehicles. But here there is another opportunity for us as a country. If you use electric vehicles, if you use solar power, you also require efficient batteries. And there is a lot of work that needs to be done. You know, if you look at last 150 years, the advancements that have taken place in battery technologies, they are not comparable to similar advances that have taken place in semiconductor technology or pharmaceutical industry and so on. So there is a great advancement that needs to be done there. But however, the materials that are required for making these batteries also is another challenge for us. Today we talk about lithium batteries, and there are only 3 or 4 countries which have huge deposits of this lithium. So instead of following the same path and in developing lithium ion based batteries, we need to look at simple technologies but efficient technologies. For example, sodium air batteries. Sodium is abundantly available, and if you use sodium air batteries, their volume and weight also will come down. So there are many such opportunities for us to develop new technologies in order to minimize, in order to slow down the climate change.
Because you're right, because the role of rare earth metals in
semiconductor industry.
In the semiconductor industry means that you see almost a global race between countries to acquire mines where these rare earth materials and minerals are produced. So before we end our conversation, I want to ask you a larger philosophical question on the relationship between technology and society and its impact on individuals. In his seminal work, Future Shock, the futurist Alvin Toffler predicted that the anxieties of a world upended by rapidly emerging technologies. He spoke about how the root cause of most social problems in the times to come would be the result of an accelerated rate of technological and social change that would leave people disconnected and suffering from what he called a shattering stress and disorientation. How well have his predictions about social paralysis, disorientation induced by rapid technological change held up?
Right. Let me step back a little bit. 100 years ago, 200 years ago, if you look at the lifestyle of the people, at the end of the day, after you met the requirements for your family and yourself, if there is some surplus, we used to share that with our neighbors, give the vegetables or give milk and other things, share with each other. And that helped us in developing better relations with each other. But today we moved from such situation of abundance to scarcity. And once that happens, there is so much of competition among ourselves to access these scarce resources. So the role of technology, therefore, should be to create that abundance so that neutral values such as compassion, loving each other, sharing with each other, these neutral values should be promoted. New technologies should not force us to lead a life of anxiety. They should not force us, lead us to lead a life of competition, mindless competition. Rather, what we should be doing is, instead of focusing on improving only the standard of living, we should be focusing on improving the quality of living, right? So, and instead of focusing only on mindless competition, we should focus on caring for each other. And also, we should focus on the importance of the diversity that we have, instead of indulging in identity politics. So, technology alone will not be able to provide the desired results for building human societies. We also have to look at the very nature of the human beings and then integrate these two in an effective manner. That is the only way we can lead a happy life. And that's the reason why I think that right from the childhood, right from the school level, People need to understand the meaning of values and ethics, the importance of their role with the society, with people around them, with the environment around them. So these values have to be instilled right from the beginning, so that when they become adults, when they become productive human beings, whatever work they do, they will keep in the back of their mind that I should positively impact the other human beings around me, rather than creating a situation which will lead to a kind of imbalance in our lives.
And in creating this society which values empathy, which values quality of life, what role do you think our civilizational values have in creating a society like this and in minimizing the impact of quote-unquote future shock on individuals and societies?
Right. So that is why I said that we also need to focus on spiritual values, right? Sometimes it is also important for us to become philosophical. We do, of course, have a long civilizational continuity in our country. No other country has that kind of continuity. It's only because we focused more, in addition to developing physically, in addition to developing materialistically, we have also given equal importance to the spiritual aspects of our life, and that needs to be done. And in order to do that, right from the beginning, from the school level, it is important that we expose our students to the basic elements of philosophy. Because see, in philosophy we ask three basic questions. What is real? We are all looking all around and interacting with each other, and consciously or unconsciously we are asking this question, what is real? And then how do I know what I know? This is the second fundamental question that philosophy asks. And then the third most important question philosophy asks is, how do I value what I know? So these are the three important questions that we are gathering answers, because there is no unique answer. Each individual is gathering different answers, and then when they accumulate these answers, they develop a kind of values in their life, they develop a kind of character in their life. And that is the reason why I think elements, the fundamentals of philosophy, they have to be taught right from childhood, not only to the students, even to the teachers. For example, how do I treat my students as human beings who are doing good things, or do I look at them with a suspicion that they are functioning out of their own self-interest? So these ethical issues also, these philosophical issues also will shape how we interact with each other. So that is the reason why I strongly feel that both in the teacher training programs and right from the childhood, elements of philosophy need to be taught to everybody.
I think that's a wonderful note to end our discussion. Thank you, Dr. Kumar, for a fascinating conversation. It was an absolute pleasure to host you for this discussion. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.